Okay, same principles with 3/4, only things are moving left, right, up, and down, right? So when you're doing your 50 heads assignment, which is next week, sketchbook, you'll be drawing 50 of these from your imagination. Then you're actually going to do 45 from your imagination. You're going to do 5 from a reference that you've pulled out of either a magazine or you've printed off, right? And you want to do more 3/4 than anything else, right? Don't even do frontal. Like, don't worry about that. I like to start with that because it helps with all of the dimensionality and like all the rules and fractions and things like that. But honestly, it's not going to create a very good drawing for you. So for 3/4, we start again with a nice circle. Hopefully you're getting better at the circle thing, right? If it doesn't look like a good circle, fix it. Because some of you got into trouble with having like more of an oval shape, less of a circle shape, and vice versa when it comes to the cutaway on the side. So in a 3/4, ooh, it can be a little bit bigger, longer down here. So in a 3/4, that cutaway or that side plane changes as we move around, right? So thinking about what we're going to cut away now becomes about ovals or ellipses and not circles, right? But it still needs to be about 2/3 of the vertical space. We don't worry about the horizontal space, right? So what we're going to do is start with just somebody who's maybe like kind of looking to the side like this, right? As it's a circle, it changes to more of an oval. So I'm going to give myself a couple of little guidelines up in here like I did before, like about here and about here, hopefully adding up roughly to 1/3, right? Then I'm going to drop in an oval on the side. And again, I like to go over it several times until I have what I feel like is going to look good. We start with the cranium like we did before. I like this because I see the dimensionality a little bit faster. It's more dynamic. And honestly, Loomis Method seems to work the best with 3/4, which, you know, it's the most applicable in real life. Okay. So now we determine the X and Y axis on this thing. I generally will determine my X axis first because I want to think about like whether or not this person's looking up or down, right? So in this case, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I'm going to have them looking like pretty much straight to the side. So I'm going to give myself basically a mark that would like go straight through the middle of that, right? Mine's kind of tilting down a little bit, which works. It'll be fine. So now we have to create a perpendicular mark, right, for the y-axis. So since this person's looking down just a touch, if we make this perpendicular just on the merits of how those two marks will cross, we don't have to worry so much, right, about how much of this sphere is moving or whatever. So it's tilted forward just a touch, just a little bit, right? So all right, so since this person's looking down a little bit, remember we talked about that earlier, like the brow line shifts, right? We're not necessarily going to be drawing a straight line across because that really breaks the whole concept of the sphere, right? If we draw a bunch of straight lines over the top of a circle, it does not look like dimensional. It doesn't look like the cross contour stuff that we've done in the past. So when I think about this, I think about how the brows change a little bit like this, right? So if I'm looking down, my brow's going to do this, right? If I'm looking up, it's going to do something like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create sort of a slight swoop from there. And when I draw that, I want that to intimate the roundness of this sphere, right? So if it doesn't hook around enough, you're going to lose that dimensionality, right? So be picky about that. Now, same principles apply as before, right? If we did use 2/3 of the space with this, okay, and we cut this in half correctly, we should be able to use the bottom of this, wrap it around, and have that become the nose line. But it has to be parallel to this. Okay, so it has to have the same form, right? So a lot of times what I'll do when I'm trying to get the same thing is I'll trace over it a few times, then I'll move down. And I'm paying close attention to how much space do I have between these two lines as I move around. So now we've got our brow, we've got our nose, and so far we haven't had to do any measuring, right? I mean, we've approximated the 2/3 thing, and that's why this system works so well. It's quick. Okay, so our symmetry line's going to change, right? When you're looking straight on with me like this, as I move over, it becomes more rounded, that kind of thing. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to create a symmetry line. If we were looking, like again, from a reference, we would pay attention to the foreshortening of the eyes kind of thing, like which eye looks smaller, looks like it's going away, how would we split the face? So I'm just going to kind of generally select this area here, and I'm going to wrap that cross contour style down to my brow line. And when I'm doing that, I'm looking at how that plays with this, how that edge of the cutaway plays with it, how the edge of my sphere plays with that. It should look like a pretty good sphere as we do this. Now, the one thing that does change, right, is that once we hit the brow line, in order for us to get the jaw in there with the correct form and shape, we have to move straight down from this and make it still parallel to this. So that hasn't changed, right? That's the same thing we did in profile. So once I hit this point, then I make a symmetry line that comes down and is parallel to this. So it has to come straight down. It can't wrap around, right? Sometimes I'll make the mistake of wrapping it around because I'm like, oh, I'm drawing a sphere. But if it wraps around, we're basically taking the jaw and we're smashing it in, right, to the face. We need that jaw to protrude. We got to remember, this is a cranium. We're building the jaw off of that, right? So the same principle applies here in terms of like how much space we need from brow to nose and nose to chin, right? So I'm just going to measure that right here. I'm going to come down, keep that the same. I'm going to make a little hash mark right there. So I'm going to double check and make sure, is that the same dimension, right? That way I can set up my frontal plane. Because we have a side plane, we have a frontal plane as well. So I like to give my chin just a little bit more dimension. Like I'm going to come across a little bit. I'm going to come from about this cheek area just down to this edge. And that shape is really determined based upon your reference. In this case, it's a good generic to help us. Okay, so again, our ear would exist back in here. And this is our area where we would go ahead and begin the jaw. So we're going to come down a little bit here. Now there's some foreshortening happening here, right? It changes a little bit. And again, we got to pay attention to our reference. But I like to hook it here, bring it pretty straight as it comes across. And just connect it. So it should almost kind of look robotic, right? Or like Android-y or something. Again, pretty generic. So we'll modify the back of the head again because we don't have all this business back in here. Okay? Our skull would actually come like in here kind of thing. And again, our neck would kind of like begin in that area. One more thing that's going to help is defining the extended aspect of the side of our face. So think about the face as being a plane on this side, but then that continues down the face, and our cheeks like this, right? Our jaw on this side, that's an extension of that plane, right? So if we go from like here, remember we talked about how that's like the temple area? We could like draw a handy line that comes here, and that will divide the frontal plane from the two side planes. So I generally will take that to the chin here. So thinking about the chin as being kind of flat kind of thing. So I will typically go like about kind of like this. That way we can look at this as being a side plane. This becomes a frontal plane. This is what you're going to practice over and over and over again, but you're going to practice it with scenarios where your person's looking up. They're looking more to the side, right? You'll try some exaggerated ones. You'll get good at this idea of like, okay, I dropped a circle in here. Now where do I go from there? Now I just carve away some side of the face, X, Y axis, right? And then we follow those steps from there, and we create a lot of these kind of like maquettes, right? So from here, of course, if we wanted to get into facial features, ocular cavity, and everything changes with this because of the foreshortening aspect. So that eye is going to be a little smaller. The ocular cavity is going to be a little bit smaller. We talked about all of that stuff with spatial device. I'm just going to basically rough in the plane of the nose. My mouth is going to exist about halfway through here. We would modify this to suit what we're looking at. So like I'll have to modify the brow. Like I'll keep this brow out, I'll bring it in. I'll allow that cheekbone to come out. I'll allow this to skinny up a little bit. I'll change up my jaw to some degree. So essentially we use this model, and then what we do is we modify it based upon what we're looking at, right? So we'll want to get good with this. Kind of looks like an awesome creepy guy. Kind of liking that. Okay. So what we do at this point, right, on your 3/4 page, what I want you to do is do 2 smaller circles. And I want you to choose where you're going to cut some of that off. I want you to change whether they're looking up or down, get that X and Y axis, and I want you to problem solve how that would look, right? So let's see. I'm going to kind of create a scenario for myself here. I'm going to shave this off on the side. Only you're going to select what you're going to do with this. I'm going to have this person looking up, and that means that I need to develop this. I'm going to drop that across like so. I'm going to drop this across like so. I'm going to draw in my symmetry line. I'm going to come straight down from this and make sure that this is parallel to this. I'm going to drop that in here where that chin's going to go. In this case, I'd probably see some of the under part of the chin. So basically, I want you to develop 2 more where you choose the direction the person's looking. And you can leave it really kind of generic like this. Have them looking up, have them looking down, right? I want you to select how that's going to go. And I want to see how you problem solve that. So we'll do that very briefly.